So Dave Harden grew up on a farm in Westminster, Maryland, and attended Carroll County Public Schools. His parents instilled in him a true work ethic and the values that carried forward into the rest of his life. His family has deep roots on the Eastern Shore as well. His great-grandmother, Lillian Downey, would grow her vegetables on the shore in Rock Hall and then sell them in Lexington Market in Baltimore. After college, Harden was motivated to serve and headed off to start a school in Botswana for a volunteer teacher. After his early years overseas, he returned home to earn a Master's of Art in Political Science from Columbia University and a Juris Doctor at Georgetown University. In 1998, Harden was sworn in as a Foreign Service officer and served overseas in some of the toughest places on earth. In 2016, President Obama nominated him, and the Senate confirmed Harden to serve as the Assistant Administrator for the USAID Bureau for Democracy, Conflict, and Humanitarian Assistance. In that capacity, he led a bureau focused on global crisis, response, and political transition. He was honored to spearhead the American response to crises around the world. Harden is a service family. Harden's is a service family. So after the events of January 6th, which occurred while his son was serving overseas, he knew he couldn't sit back and allow someone like Andy Harris use the mantle of patriotism as a reason to sow division and ultimately help incite an insurrection. Harden and his wife, Sharon, own a farm in Westminster. They raise honeybees, herbs, vegetables, and hay to this day. Okay, so that's the introduction. Dave, you have the floor.
Well, Heidi, thank you for having me. And this is actually the second time I've been to Elkton and Cecil County this week. So I was up at the Memorial Day parade. It was a lovely day. It was, you know, when we served overseas, and we served for 17 straight years, we served because of the experiences that we had on Monday in Elkton, right? It was communities and families and small businesses all coming together to join in honoring those who had served and died, and to reflect upon our American values. And so it really was a great coming home for me, in the sense that I grew up in a small town, and this was a very early launch for me in my campaign to do the Memorial Day parade in Elkton. So thank you for having me. Thank you for including me in the parade. And thank you for having me here tonight. So, you know, many of you may recall in the Cold War, in the schools, there was like a box, and it said, if in a case of an emergency, break the glass. In case of emergency, break the glass. We are facing 3 big emergencies right now in America. And it's time that the Democrats break the glass. So I'm running on 3 platforms to address the 3 emergencies that we see. First, we need to protect democracy. Democracy is seriously at risk. The insurrection and the failure of the response to the insurrection has led to an undermining of our democratic core values. We are at serious risk. I have worked all over the world, and when democracies begin to fail, some of the basic liberties and responsibilities start chipping away. And that's where we are right now. My son was in the Middle East when January 6th occurred. He was trying to keep eyes on Iran and the Taliban and the Russians. And he called me and he said, "Dad, we look like we're in the middle of a civil war. I can't do my job." So Andy Harris put us at grave risk that day. And you all know it, but let's just reflect. He failed to certify the election, the Electoral College. He got in a fight that night on the Capitol. He got arrested carrying a gun. But there's more. He failed to honor the police who protected him and saved his life. And he also failed to pass the Defense Authorization Act that defense budget which pays our men and women who serve overseas. So on the very day he was making it harder for American and Maryland sons and daughters to defend America, he was also making sure that they didn't get paid. And you know why? Because he didn't like the Confederate base. He didn't like the review of the Confederate bases, right? We know in Maryland the challenges of our history. I've been in this district and I've been in Maryland for 350 years. If I can review the Confederate bases, then surely Andy Harris can have a spine to do that as well. And so the risk that he put and his other colleagues we are at a fundamental inflection point on our democracy. And here's the thing, without a respect for the rule of law, without protecting our Constitution, without protecting and defending our democracy, everything else is at risk. And so I'm running in a rural, conservative area, my district, with my people. If it's not going to be me to defend democracy, then who will it be? I grew up in Carroll County, in rural Carroll County 50 years ago. It is my responsibility to represent the rural people and to blunt the risk of Andy Harris's actions. But there's more. Andy Harris has been an inconsequential legislator for 12 years. You have paid him $2 million. $2 million. And what have you gotten? He changed a post office in Salisbury. He changed the name. He doesn't lead committees. He doesn't pass legislation. He's not a big visionary thinker. And yet, at this very time, we are facing dramatic and challenging economic issues in front of us. The next decade will reorganize our economic structures. You can believe in climate change, or you can think climate change is a hoax. At the individual level, it doesn't actually matter, because capital markets, the financial markets around the world and in the United States, the technology, they've already decided. They've decided that we're moving towards climate solutions, and that we, in this district, in Maryland, and in America, we have a binary choice. Do we design, build, and sell the solutions for the entire world? And make no mistake, climate impact will have a serious impact on the Eastern Shore. So do we build the solutions, or do we buy from those who do? Now, we have been in this situation before, in Baltimore, in this district, in Maryland. In the late 70s, we were unable to see and respond to the economic trends of the world, and we lost the steel industry. The collapse of the steel industry devastated Baltimore and its surrounding communities to this day. Now, how do we respond to the economic challenges of this next decade? We learned some of the lessons that we took from World War II. We set up an accelerated advanced research project agency for climate technologies. We take something like the Aberdeen Proving Ground, and not only do we incubate these climate solutions, but then we test them in this very district. There is probably no better place on the face of the earth to test some of the new technologies that will be driving the solutions for the next decade than this district. We are close to some of the smartest talent on the face of the earth. We have Hopkins and University of Maryland and APL and the Naval Academy and a lot more universities that are in our neighborhood that can help provide the human talent to innovate and build. But the testing is also important, because when we research and build and design, we need to test this. And climate impact in Dorchester, for instance, will have a massive set of consequences on agriculture, transportation, infrastructure, the energy system over the next decade. Why not us seize this opportunity? Why not us, within 2 hours of Washington and Baltimore and Philadelphia and New York City, within 6 hours of 40 million people in the highest markets on the face of the earth? Why not us innovate? Why be Bethlehem Steel? Right? That was the counterexample. Let's seize this future. Andy Harris doesn't think this way. He doesn't understand the economics. He doesn't understand the future. He doesn't see a big America. And frankly, I'm the only candidate who has spent 30 years overseas working with communities and households and companies that were disconnected from the global economy. And I learned some lessons in those 30 years. Take Cecil County, for example. It's 2 hours from every major city. Cecil County can be the extraordinary little engine that could. Right? Or it could be the forgotten town, Elkton. This is our choice. The third point, though, is how we unleash American talent. How do we prepare for this next decade? Right? We need an economy that works for everybody. It needs to work for working families. It needs to work for rural people and urban people and black and brown and white. It needs to work for all. And how do we begin to do that? We can begin by having childcare for working families. If we start at the age of 3, not only do we relieve the working families, but we're creating economic wealth for the households that need the lift. Instead of spending $1,500 a month for the child to go to daycare so both parents can work, what we do is we release them like we did with kindergarten. When I grew up, they didn't have kindergarten in Carroll County, but then we decided kindergarten was important. Why not why not school for 3 and 4-year-olds? We know that will prepare our kids to compete in the global economy, but it will also allow the families to save that money to buy a house or to pay for college for their kids or to improve their skills. So it's an economic opportunity for families. And of course, we need healthcare that works. These families that are trying to build the future for our nation cannot choose between the mortgage and insulin. Right? That's a false choice. That puts our people behind in this global race. And we need broadband. The kids in rural America, the businesses in rural America, even if you are 2 hours away from New York City and Washington, D.C., if you don't have broadband, you can't sell or learn or engage with the global economy. During times of great crisis in our history, we connected our nation. Abraham Lincoln did it in the Civil War. He built out the Transcontinental Railroad. During a time of Civil War, FDR, he electrified every last house. Even in the smallest communities, in the most rural places, he began the rural electrification program at the height of the Depression. Eisenhower, he built the interstate highway system that unleashed an economy and tightened the community of our states. It is time that we have broadband. So this is my platform. These are my messages. I want to take some questions, but before I do so, I want to spend a moment on the race. It's no surprise that Andy Harris won by 27 points just last November. It's a rural district. And you know, Democrats don't do well in rural districts. They don't. Barack Obama did better than Joe Biden in rural America. We need candidates who are from the district, who grew up with the people, who understand that if you've been swinging a hammer for the last 30 years as a contractor, your back is hurt and your knees are broken, right? And you need a break. We need to be able to speak to rural Americans who look at issues differently than urban elites. And if we can't do that, we will not deliver the economy and the jobs for the people in our district who need it. And so I've hired a great Maryland-based, district-based team. But I've also hired national folks that have experience in taking red districts blue. I've hired 4 teams. I've hired a digital marketing team, a media team, a finance team, and a direct marketing team. All of these have worked in Southern Virginia, Western Pennsylvania, and the coast of Maine. And they have turned red districts blue. Andy Harris is uniquely vulnerable. And we can claim the mantle of patriotism and hope and democracy and integrity and decency to make this district proud. And so with that, I'm going to stop. I'm going to pause. We're going to open it up for questions. Give me your toughest, most interesting, challenging questions that you have, Cecil County. Over to you, Heidi.
Okay. I'm going to start right off with a question because you're a farmer. What's your stance on immigration in general?
So let me just say that when we win this race, we're going to build a coalition that includes progressives and moderates and centrist Democrats, independents, as well as the Hogan Romney Republicans, because you can't win this race unless you build a big tent. And I can build a big tent. And that means that we have to take ideas that are good ideas from wherever they are. And I'm going to answer your question, but let me give you an example. Romney's idea on child poverty is superior to Biden's. Biden wants to run it through tax credits. Romney wanted to run it through the Social Security system, right? So if there are good ideas that are out there, then we should embrace them. And it was actually George Bush about a month ago in an op-ed that put up a comprehensive plan for immigration that I think works. So it begins with DACA. These are Americans, and we need to make sure that they become, in fact, Americans. But it also means that we need to control our borders. We can't just have chaotic open borders where people come in without any rhyme or reason. I spoke today to a colleague whose mom waited 12 years, and he's a progressive Democrat. His mother-in-law waited 12 years to get in the door. They did it right. We need a streamlined situation. We need to be able to attract talent. We need to be able to allow people to come in. By the way, we can't pay our Social Security without more people. Americans aren't having simply enough babies. So if we want to pay Social Security, if we want the vibrancy of America, if we want the innovation that immigrants bring, then we need to be that Statue of Liberty, where we open up for the huddled masses who yearn to breathe freely. But we need to also do it in a responsible way, where certain people don't cut the line, and where we act within our values. So I hope that answers your question, but we need immigrants. They are the lifeblood of our culture, our future, our economy.
Who's next? Thank you. Yes, David.
Hey, Dave Harden. First off, thank you so much for being here tonight. What is your stance on healthcare? Do you support Medicare for all? What is your position on that?
Yeah, thank you, David. So in a nutshell, I support Biden's plan, right? And Biden offers the option that is available to your grandmother, right? Or to your neighbor down the street. So if she gets Medicare, that should be an option that's available for everybody. But some people don't necessarily want Medicare. Some people want to keep it within their own companies or get it through private means or whatever. And so what I am proposing and what Biden has proposed and what is probably the most realistic within our Congress right now is the public option. Which, just to point out, the word public option is not a great branding strategy, right? Getting the same healthcare opportunities that your grandmother has is a different way of describing it.
Thank you, Dave. And if you don't mind adding a second question to that, what is your stance overall on the recent Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
Well, I was the longest serving U.S. diplomat in American history on this account. I was also a negotiator under the Obama administration when George Mitchell was the envoy. I spent 11 years on Israel and Palestine. I looked at it primarily from an economic perspective. There's 1,000 issues, right? There's the big five: settlement, security, borders, right of return, etc. And then there's 995 others. I worked on the 995 others, right? The things that make the difference in people's lives. And the Israel-Palestine issue are way more complicated than a soundbite, right? So Andy Harris will come out and say, I stand with Israel. That actually does nothing, right? That doesn't acknowledge any of the complexities that surround this area. So let me be really clear about a couple of things. Hamas is an authoritarian terrorist organization that has its thumb under its people, right? Israel is the stronger party, and Israel has to make the first next move. But let me go a little bit deeper. In 2005, in Gaza, we decided on a policy which was not unreasonable, which you do in foreign policy all the time, that economic pressure on Hamas would yield political change. So you put enough pressure on them economically and they would fall, they would be defeated, they would get out of the way, or they would moderate, right? That was the theory. It's a reasonable theory. At the same time, in the Northwest Bank, in the northern corner of the West Bank in Jenin, which was equally as dangerous as Gaza, which was the center for the suicide bombers, right? We had a different theory, and that theory was economic opportunity would yield political change. So it's rare in foreign policy that you're able to test different theories. And here's what we know. What we know is that after 15 years, economic pressure on Hamas has not yielded anything positive. Hamas is stronger militarily, politically, socially. They have no challengers, and they're able to assert greater, deeper, more lethal firepower into the state of Israel. Jenin, on the other hand, we lowered the unemployment rate, we reduced the militias, we improved governance, and we built up infrastructure, and the trade alone bought us 10 to 15 years to negotiate some kind of stability. Whether or not you get the political stability is for the parties to decide. But I was able to buy 15 years of political stability in the northern West Bank. So these are really tough issues. I have spoken exhaustively on these things, including recently on the BBC in a long form interview. Happy to share it in more detail. But the bottom line is the Israelis and Palestinians are not leaving. They both occupy the same space. They're not getting divorced. America cannot solve the problem. It is incumbent upon them, with the Israelis taking the first step, to figure out how they're going to deconflict this unending risk. I'm happy to spend hours with you, David, on this.
Thank you. I would love to meet up with you sometime. I really thank you so much for being here tonight. Thank you for answering my questions.
Thank you.
Anybody? Yeah, Jamie.
Thanks, David. Thank you for answering that question. And Dave, thanks for a fantastic answer. That was wonderful. I have a simpler question, I think. Is that one of the services you'd like to expand in Cecil County is for childcare? I know that that's great for working families, but this is an area I think where there may be more stay-at-home mothers and homeschool children in this area, like more than I've seen anywhere else where I've never been. So is there any benefit to these families, like the rural, traditional rural families in your thinking?
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, I'm just going to talk about my family for a second. So my kids went to traditional schools, but my kids were also homeschooled. And my kids were homeschooled for many years, in fact. And the reason was, I mean, it began with the fact that our oldest had two competing learning disabilities, right? He was both dyslexia, his dyslexic and dysgraphia. And so it was very hard for teachers to figure him out. And it was only actually, because we were overseas at the time, we were in Israel then. And we came back and we were at the farm in Westminster, and my wife read the Carroll County Times, and she saw a story about this kid that had competing learning disabilities. And it's very, very hard for schools to figure all of this out. And so she was able to unlock his talent. He graduated from Harvard and is a software engineer in New York City. But you know, in the fifth grade, I mean, in the kindergarten and first grade, we weren't sure if he was ever even going to be able to read. And then I mean, she homeschooled all the kids, but the other one was a top athlete. And so she trained 40 hours a week, and my wife was able to homeschool her while she was training. And she's 23. She's at MIT doing missile defense, and graduated from high school. She graduated from college extremely early, and she did this because she was homeschooled. So we have deep respect for people that take non-traditional paths and how they want to raise their families. And I think that should be encouraged. There shouldn't be one size fit all. It should not be the case that government knows that, hey, you know what, every 3-year-old is going to go here. I mean, if a dad or a mom wants to homeschool their kids, we want them to do it. And we want them to have kind of the opportunities that are available to other kids. So if they want to take swimming lessons at the Y, or they want to play, you know, youth soccer, or any of that, that's totally fine. You know, and I think it's important in education that we allow diversity of diversity of options for families so that they can build what's best for them. But here's what's not fine. What's not fine is to have underperforming schools that aren't preparing the kids for the next generation, whether that's VOTEC or it's community college or whatever it is. And look, most people don't go to college. But you know what most people can, like, not most, but what people are doing in our district right now, they're going to Salisbury to do deep sea maritime welding for wind turbines. That goes to my point earlier about, are we going to seize the future? Right? Are we going to just drive the outcomes, or are we going to buy from those who do? Right now, all the wind turbines are built elsewhere. They're built in China and Northern Europe. But we could build them here, right? We could build them here with our steel. But at a minimum, we can provide the deep sea maritime welding capabilities, right? And do that around the world. If you are an HVAC guy or you're a plumber, you can make a living better than a lot of lawyers in Cecil County if you have your own business, right? I will tell you though, the regulations on small businesses are way too complicated. They're way too difficult. And so getting back to the question of what do you do with the families that might want to be homeschooled? It's fine, let's embrace that. Let's let them define what their future is going to be and give them the skills to succeed, whether it's going to college or it's being a maritime welder.
Thanks. I also wasn't really very clear on what your service was. You were in Israel.
I was in the foreign service. I was a foreign service officer. I was a diplomat.
Oh, thanks. Okay.
and
I
I
think
worked.
you have a great message for this area. Thank you.
Yeah, and here's the thing. I actually wasn't sure because I worked all over the world with the U.S. Agency for International Development, and so I wasn't sure how it was actually going to translate. But actually, it's been really embraced in the district because I worked on economics, right? I worked on economics of disaffected communities who felt aggrieved, left behind, forgotten, and for 30 years. I was proud to represent America. But I also learned something, right? The poverty rates in this district are actually pretty high.
Mhm.
Not going to reduce poverty rates if you don't have the infrastructure and you don't have the schools. If we can't unlock that talent in Somerset County or in Dorchester or Wacomico or in Carroll County or in Cecil County, we will not compete over the next decade. We will not compete in the global economy.
Okay, I'm thinking maybe one more question, Lois?
Thanks. I always ask this question, but I know that you talked about, new technologies, and we could do all kinds of things with that in our district. You talked about the windmills, but I always ask, for comments on maintaining the rural quality of the county as well, your comments on that. And I understand you come from a rural district yourself, because that's important to me.
Oh, it's important to me too. Absolutely. I love the rural nature of our district. And I was, at the turn of the century, you saw a lot of sprawling growth, which really undermines a lot of the culture, and the meaning behind what we do. So let me just talk about that. Housing is completely unaffordable for most people. The answer isn't 1 acre houses on sprawling subdivisions forever. That's expensive. It's actually not what people want anymore. And so what you can envision, like Elkton is a cool town, right? There's something in Elkton that's special. And the economy of Elkton has changed. I mean, now there's like craft breweries, right? And like cool little shops and stuff like that. So what you want to do is put, more, you want higher density housing in the small towns, so there's a vibrancy and a culture and an economy that's working. And then you kind of keep the rural feel of the farmlands. I do want to talk about farmers for 1 second though. And what you get there is an economy that works instead of a commuter economy, right? Because right now, if you're a parent and your kids are in kind of rural Elkton, what are they going to do, right? They're going to have to move. But wouldn't it be better if they could like move to like Elkton, where they're 15 minutes away and there's cool things that are happening there, instead of having to move to New York City or Washington, D.C. I mean, that's what families really want. I will say that the farmers get a raw deal in our current structure, particularly on the East Coast, right? A lot of the big farming just tags into the Chicago Commodities Exchange, and basically they get screwed in the pricing, okay? But what you see that's emerging now are like, farm breweries and wineries, and you can spin that out a lot more. You can have like heritage flour, you can have honeybees. I mean, there are a lot of things that you can do to drive rural economies in a much, much better way. And there's somebody here from Harford County. I mean, Harford County actually has an ag incubator that I think is an interesting model to look at. So I'll stop on the farms.
Thank you.
Eunice, you have a question, don't you?
Yes, I just wanted to know, Dave. I've asked this question a lot too, because Stacey Abrams seems to have pulled a magic trick out of the air and turning Georgia blue. I know that you said that you've hired 4 different teams to do that for you, but what specifically, if you can tell me, will you tell these people in District 1 to make them think Trump's idea was a bad idea?
Well, I'll begin with the fact that I have gotten donations in my campaign, and I just launched May 10th, right? So I've gotten donations from Bernie voters, you know, Biden voters, Warren voters. I've also gotten donations from Trump voters and Harris voters, right? I've gotten pretty big checks from people who voted for Trump. So how do we do this? There's a few things. First of all, being new to politics like this, it is true that money matters. It's actually sad that it's such a driving consideration. It really is. It's difficult, but I'm going to do perfectly fine on the money. I'm going to have a national level war chest. I will be able to compete head to toe with anybody. But you know what? It actually isn't the money that makes all the difference. You just have to have enough. You just have to have enough to be in the game. What matters is that you win the votes, right? And so having common sense values, not being a crazy, not promoting an insurrection, right? These are things that count. I will tell you that that it will require, if there isn't redistricting, it will require that 35,000 voters who voted for Andy Harris come to the Democratic candidate. So you ask yourself, who will build that coalition that will be attractive to the Republican, reasonable Hogan, Romney, Cheney people, right? I was just up in Elkton. I had a lot of Republicans came up to me and they said, we're never voting for Andy Harris, but we also want to vote. And we need results. We don't need politics. We don't need fringe. We need results. This is what I do. This is what I've done forever. And so the other thing is, I will say that if I can get my numbers up seriously enough, redistricting almost certainly will benefit me personally. The Eastern Shore, and if I throw in Cecil County, which I kind of sometimes do and sometimes don't. I mean, it's 12 counties. There's 8 on the Eastern Shore. Cecil is in the middle, and then you have Hartford, Carroll, Baltimore, and Carroll, right? With some relatively small, so there's just not enough people on the Eastern Shore. You have to draw from the north or the west, right? And with some relatively small changes on the along Carroll and Baltimore and Hartford counties, it's an even Steven game. It still will be rural, right? It'll still be kind of conservative and traditional, but it won't tilt so heavily towards Andy Harris. And I think that if those small changes, if you include the city of Westminster, not the farmlands of Westminster, if you include the city of Westminster, which is where I went to high school, if you include Owings Mills and Reisterstown and maybe a little bit deeper into Hartford County, those minor changes are probably litigation proof and probably will make the difference.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for
Thank you.
joining us. We would keep you on forever, but we do have a whole business meeting.
I'm going to let you go. I just want to say I've enjoyed my last, the last few days in Elkton and in Cecil County, whether I was there in person or virtually. Heidi, thank you for including me. It was very nice meeting you at the parade. And look, Elkton, stay strong. And Marty's putting in our, we need volunteers. We need a ground game. We're working on policies like opioid addiction and what we can do in Cecil County. And of course, we need small donors that can chip in, and Marty sent everything. So thank you, Cecil County.